Hey everybody, welcome to Advanced Feature Flagging. It's all about the data. I'm Dave Karow, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you in about 18 minutes, give or take a few. I'm going to go through this slide presentation pretty quickly. My goal is to get us all on the same page, and then we'll have a really good conversation afterwards, right? So we'll do these three sections. We'll review feature flags to make sure we all kind of understand what they are and how they're used. And then the meat of why this session is important, which is about the data, right? How do we make sense of the data? And we'll kind of look both to sharpen our tools about how you measure matters, and you shouldn't believe everything you see in data. And then we'll talk about how to put the flags and the data together to get something that's really an experimentation platform. So first of all, just to recap on feature flags, right? Many of you already are using feature flags. And they're a tool that empowers your org to separate code deploy from feature release. For those who aren't familiar, a feature flag is a simple if-else statement. It's usually powered by a configuration or a service or an external tool. And it can be modified to target the code that it wraps around without doing a new deployment, right? And you can do that to specifically target subsets of your population. Usually they're targeted at users, but they can modify anything based on session or service or request, anything that's applicable to the code change you're doing. Let's look at phases of a rollout, right? So at the beginning, deploy doesn't cause any exposure to users, right? So first we deploy, the feature flag is turned off, nobody's getting the feature. Then we gradually ramp up. And at the beginning, we might actually ramp up only to employees. And certainly before that, we would have allowed access to the developer, the dev and the test team. But we might then do some dog fooding with employees and then start rolling out to our customers, maybe with as little as 1 or 2% or a little bit more. And our goal there is error mitigation. We're trying to find bugs. We're trying to find problems we didn't already find in testing by doing testing in prod. And we're even doing a little bit of that with actual customers, because no matter how much testing in prod we do, we're probably going to miss something that a real user is going to run into. And we want to run into that early, right, before we get to a lot of users. And then we're going to ramp up. And understanding the effects of your change requires lots of data. So if you really want to prove whether a change you've made in your code is making a difference on how users behave, the more data you can get, the better. And that's called maximum power ramp, basically a 50-50 split. Then we're going to ramp up, and we might pause along the way to do a scale mitigation. We might get to 60, 70, 80% and hold for a while and wait through a peak traffic period to make sure that we can handle scale, as well as that we don't have bugs and that we're making the user behavior change the way we were hoping. And then we're released, then we're out. So let's get into the meat of the talk, which is how you measure matters. I want to focus on this because it's a stumbling point for a lot of people that are used to using sort of traditional charts and graphs, and then you get into a gradual rollout world, and a lot of this breaks down, right? Your metrics don't really work the same way when you're going out to 5% of your population. Here's a systems dashboard from our own product. We were rolling out some changes, and suddenly we saw these huge spikes, and we spent a lot of time on triaging, what have we changed, and why is this happening, what's going on? And we'll come back to this in a minute, but suffice to say that things weren't quite as they appeared. Let's look at a more typical situation. Here you see that when a feature was taken to 100%, there was a huge spike up in something and a spike down in something else. It's probably latency and throughput, right? And that's obvious to see. For one of the first things we did at Split was to overlay feature flag changes onto our graphs. And you can see when it's 100%, yeah, we kind of can figure out what happened here. But think about that. The 5%, we rolled out to 5% first, and you could not see the differences in the graphs. There's just no meaningful difference versus the noise before them, right? And that's why when you're doing these gradual rollouts, you can miss really useful, important data if you're not looking through the right kind of lens, right? So I'm going to briefly cover this one, which is that correlation is not causation. Ice cream sales and shark attacks both peak in the summer, but they're not related to each other. They don't cause each other, right? We'll come back to that. So turns out that dashboard I showed you, that wasn't a feature change. It was a customer of ours that was undergoing a distributed denial of service attack. And so we wasted a ton of time trying to figure out what was going on, what was wrong with our system or our code. Turns out nothing was, right? It would have been nice to have a little clearer information about what was going on. So let's get back to, so just looking at the dashboard is not going to be enough, right? And especially because of this, when there's other things happening in the world, whether there's changes in your product, whether the marketing is doing something, a global pandemic like what we're having now, or just nice weather, right? It can change what happens. And so the issue is, we don't want to just be visually looking at graphs or even just dealing with arbitrary threshold alerts. We want a smarter way to look at it. And science gives us a smarter way to look at it, which is the idea of a randomized controlled trial, right? If you randomize a population across a treatment and a control, and then watch the differences between them. You're accounting, since you're randomly picking people, you'll have people that are East Coast and people that are West Coast, people that are young, people that are old, whatever. Anything else that could cause variation, you're equally distributing. And so this lets you to distribute the effects of outside factors between the two samples evenly so that the things that are different are actually what you're measuring. So when you do this, the first thing you do is you have this kind of body of events that are happening, and you need to do attribution. You need to assign them to the different cohorts, the people who had it, the people that didn't have it, that kind of thing, right? And when you do, you're going to start seeing you may see some patterns emerge, right? So our goal is to actually end up with a distribution of data, right? And what you can see here, I'll jump to the next slide, is that these distributions are actually offset, which is meaningful. So if they were mostly overlapped, it's probably no difference. But the fact that these distributions are offset, the statistical analysis is telling us that there's really a difference. And stats is kind of weird, it's backwards. Stat tests basically seek to disprove that nothing happened. So the first thing they want to say is that, well, likely you didn't accomplish anything, let's prove otherwise. And so when you pass a test, what you've said is that it's more significant than if it had been random, right? And we can talk about that later if you really want to go deep in the stats geekery. So a lot of teams in modern apps, there are many ways to achieve this comparative analysis, right? And most modern teams have a lot of telemetry coming in from their systems. They've got a lot of data, and dashboarding tools have the ability to tag, right? So you can tag data from different releases as they're passing through, different experiences that are happening, and you can segment that way, and it's powerful, it's useful. Some teams have more than that. They've got sort of their in-house analysis